Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen. Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd, ikhwatul Islam, ya ibadallah. I'll try to make this clip as brief as possible, but concise. But I want to keep it extremely simple, if possible. And this particular clip is concerning the da'i in Britain known as Shamsi, as there were several questions posed to me after I did a video concerning the term super Salafi, neo Salafi, Madkhali, and thus forth and so on. And I believe in that video I made a statement about Shamsi that would depict that I have a negative opinion concerning him. And so, there were questions that were asked concerning him, especially considering the fact that people see him giving dawah in Speaker's Corner, calling the kuffar to Islam, and things of that nature. And of course, we know that dawah in general is needed. And those are things that I don't necessarily have a problem with this brother on or with, as it relates to his da'wah. The issue with Shamsi, or the problem with Shamsi, is that Shamsi belongs to a hizb. This particular hizb, although they refer to themselves as Salafi, they refer to themselves as Salafi publications. They have affiliates. They're in the UK in Birmingham, but they have affiliates here in the US in Germantown and scattered about in certain places throughout the tri-state area. So although they refer to themselves as Salafi and they call themselves Salafi publications, the reality is that this is nothing more than a brand, similar to the brand of a company. But when we look into who they are and what they're about, then we see that they are yet another group that conflict with the methodology of the Salaf. As this particular group, they are to tabdi' what the Khawarij are to takfir. In other words, they go beyond bounds. They have ghulu with them in this particular mas'ala, similar to that of the Haddadi. They go beyond bounds as it relates to these affairs of declaring to be individuals to be innovators, and masail that are surrounded around that, boycotting, and thus forth and so on, aligning one individual with another, and thus forth and so on. So this is the problem. And this particular group, the people who make up this group are well known. I'm pretty sure I don't have to go into their names. But I took the time to just compile certain characteristics that they have with them. And I wanted to mention some of these characteristics and explaining why this is dangerous that Shamsi belongs to. And it will illustrate the problem with Shamsi, excuse me. First off, that this particular group, they oblige others to follow the ijtihad of a scholar who they cling to, especially as it relates to what they refer to as al-jarh wa ta'adil. They oblige others to follow the ijtihad of a scholar, usually the scholar that they're following in that regard. And this is something that Sheikh Muhammad al-Wasabi, rahimahullah, stated was the bid'ah of Yahya al-Hajuri when he declared Yahya al-Hajuri to be an innovator. That Yahya al-Hajuri obliges others to follow his ijtihad. Well, you find that with these individuals. And so if you are not upon the ijtihad of the scholars that they cling to as it relates to these affairs, then you now become treated with hostility and rancor and hatred and distancing and or disassociation and thus forth and so on. That's one. Two, that first particular point leads to the second point, that they make the ijtihad of the scholars that they follow. Their actions show that they look at it the same way that they look at the hukm of Allah, as if the ijtihad of this scholar is the hukm of Allah. And so now they justify loving and hating surrounded around the hukm of this mujtahid, the mujtahid that they follow in a particular affair as it relates to jarh wa ta'adil. The third characteristic that they have with them, and all of these are similar to the traits of the Haddadi that went beyond bounds as it relates to these affairs. And we have to keep in mind that they were the Haddadi. This term is coined or based off the individual known as Mahmud al-Haddad. He was the first wave of Haddadiyya. He went beyond bounds as it relates to the mistakes of some of the A'immas, such as Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Al-Imam al-Nawawi, and thus forth and so on. These scholars and imams had mistakes, and he dealt with their works in a way that Ahlul Sunnah did not deal with their works. He went beyond bounds as it relates to them and their honor and their works and their scholarship and thus forth and so on, due to mistakes that they had with him. That was the first wave of the Haddadiyya. But then there was a second wave of Haddadiyya that was upon the shoulders of a man named Fali al-Harbi. And this was in the early 2000s. And for anybody that was around during that time, then they know that Salafi publications and their affiliates in places like Germantown and like this clung heavily to Falih al-Harbi. But after Falih al-Harbi was warned against by some of the scholars for the ghulu that was with him, they abandoned Falih, the personality, and maybe some principles here and there, but generally speaking, they didn't leave this ghulu that Falih al-Harbi had with him. And so, continuing with some of the points, they make, the Haddadi makes tabdi' of whoever does not make tabdi' of whom their mujtahid, the mujtahid that they follow, has made tabdi' of. So, this is one of the things that was pointed out about the Haddadi. It's not sufficient for a person with the Haddadi to come and say, you know, so-and-so, he has with him this mistake or that mistake, and acknowledge this about these individuals. He has Ash'ariyya with him, or he has this, or he has that. On the contrary, you have to say he's a mubtadi', he's a this, he's a dal mudil, and thus forth and so on. You have to say what they're saying about him, or else they place that ruling on you. Now, these individuals do similar to the same thing. And this is why you'll find that you have a personality that they deem to be a certain way, a personality from amongst Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the Salafiyun, and they deem them to be a certain way. And then you have other Salafi students who say, listen, hold up. Okay, you said he made this error, he made that error. Okay, we understand that's an error, but look, we're not going as far as saying X, Y, and Z about this individual. And then next thing you know, the hukum that they pass on the initial individual, they're passing it on these other students because they don't agree 100% with them. They don't tote the line, the same line that they're toting. So this is very similar to the way of the Haddadi. Another characteristic of this group is that they they severely blind follow two of the scholars. One, Sheikh Rabi, and two, Sheikh Ubaid al-Jabiri. But they blind follow them in a way that is definitely blameworthy. It is blameworthy, without a doubt. And especially as it relates to these issues. So much so that you'll find the ones here in the States, in Germantown and in other places, making a statement about Sheikh Rabi that he hasn't made a mistake in 25 years. As it relates to Jarh wa Ta'dil, he hasn't made a mistake in 25 years. So it's almost to say this is a statement that, of course, is false. And in the future, we'll be doing more videos to clarify certain things. But this is a statement that's false. And it is almost as if they're attributing infallibility to him by making a statement. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Another characteristic that this group has with them is that they raise their du'at above their levels. They raise their du'at above their levels. And for anybody that knows anything about this particular group, then they can affirm that. I mean, we have Abu Khadija, who really doesn't have any real study under his belt, based off his own statements. Based off his own statements from the audio that's floating around here. And likewise, Abu Iyad has no history of seeking knowledge. None. He has no history of actually seeking knowledge with the people of knowledge. And so they definitely raise their du'at above their levels and their station. Another characteristic of this particular group that is an error is that they abandon the scholars who may rightfully criticize them for wrongs that they do. And this is something that is well known. How many scholars have they distanced themselves from? From Sheikh Wasi al-Abbas to recently Sheikh Muhammad bin Hadi, and the Kuwaiti Mashaykh, the Yemeni Mashaykh. When I say Yemeni Mashaykh, yani the Yemeni Mashaykh and or ulama, yani, and on and on and on. And this is something that is known of them. And in some cases, some of these scholars, they actually revile or make defamation of. All right? And so this is not a characteristic of a Sunni or a Salafi at all. Another quality or characteristic that this group has that's negative is that they have hostility for Salafis. They have hostility for Salafis that disagree with them in certain affairs. And so, and this is despite these Salafis' efforts in calling to Tawheed and the Sunnah and warning against Bid'ah and the various groups of Bid'ah. So they have hostility to personalities. Look at what was done when this non-beneficial warning that Abu Muhammad al-Maghribi made against Siddiq al-Juyani, that they all backed. The ones here in the States backed it, and the ones in Britain backed it. There was no justification for a warning. There was no maslaha shar'iyah for the warning, and thus forth and so on. And Siddiq al-Juyani is one example. There are many examples of this. That if you disagree with them in certain affairs, yani, although you are upon the Sunnah, calling to the Sunnah and Tawheed and clarifying Shirk and Bid'ah and warning against these things, it doesn't matter what your efforts are, you disagree with them. And so now there's hostility held for you and war waged against you, and thus forth and so on. And for anybody that knows this group, they know what I'm saying is the truth. And then another thing that they have with them, which was something that was thought to have been stomped out over a decade ago, or just about a decade ago, these false terms that they have. So here Here we have, back in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, they were using the term clear and unclear. Clear Salafi, unclear Salafi. That was stomped out years ago by Sheikh Khalid al-Raddadi. But now you hear that term resurfacing again today, but it's just worded different. Right? So there you find them saying Salafis that are known to be clear. Instead of just saying a clear Salafi, unclear Salafi, you hear them saying something to the effect of the Salafi that's known to be clear. And so here it is, we're falling right back into that which was stomped out years ago. Why? Because they never left that understanding. They clung to that understanding. They just reworded it. They just repackaged it. As Sheikh Khalid al-Raddadi said then, the Salafi is always clear. If he's making a mistake in a particular matter, you clarify to him the truth in that regard. But the Salafi is always clear. There is no such thing as a clear and unclear Salafi. Yet we see this surfacing again. The Salafi that's nothing but clarity. He's always clear. He's been, and all these types of expressions, and thus forth and so on. So this is these are some observations against this his that Shamsi is, by his own admission, a part of. And so for this reason, this is the problem with Shamsi, because you find him calling people to these types of individuals and speaking about these individuals in a praiseworthy manner, although the actions that these individuals have put forth has caused a fracturing amongst Ahlul Sunnah in the UK and in the US. And these are just some of the characteristics that they have with them. And that's not to exclude the lying that they do in order to topple somebody. And the lying is usually coupled with these characteristics. The lying, the sensationalism, the inflating of a non-issue or magnification of a non-issue, making a non-issue seem like in the Sharia, it seems like within the Sharia it is an issue when aslan it's not. All of this has a magnitude of lies in order to deceive the people. But this individual, Shamsi, he approves of this. He definitely defends these types of individuals and endorses them. So he's aligned with these guys. And that's the problem with Shamsi. That's the problem with Shamsi. And so the reality is, we're not making a call. There should be no Muslim that makes a call to a group and to your quote-unquote teachers at the exclusion of everyone else as it relates to those who are traversing the Sunnah, and make it seem as if they are the only ones in existence within the West that traverse upon the methodology of the Salaf. I would beg to differ with that. They have too much ghulu with them for it to be said that they are traversing upon the methodology of the Salaf 100%. They have too much characteristics of Haddadiyya with them in this regard. So we say no to Hizbiyya. We say no to Hizbiyya in that regard. And so this is these things that I've mentioned and the position that Shamsi has with this group. This is the problem with Shamsi. This is the problem with Shamsi. And I could say more, but I'm going to leave it at this because, like I said, I wanted this to be brief. But there are going to be more clarifications that come by Allah, by the permission of Allah, concerning that Hizb known as Salafi publications, to make it explicitly clear to the people that they are a Hizb and that they do wage war against others from amongst Ahlul Sunnah without due right. Without due right. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala knows best. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.